Good evening, everyone. Today we are here for the With Global Alliance webinar for privacy rules. The topic of discussion is how do PR and communication support companies managing their reputation for data privacy. I am Minal D'Rozario, co-founder Ideosphere Consulting from India, will be moderating the panel, and I have this wonderful panel from US, France, and UK who would be introducing themselves. So without further ado, I would like to kind of welcome the panelists for this lovely discussion, and I hope we can have some learnings and takeaways from this discussion. I'll give it to Elizabeth to kind of introduce herself and then start the panel discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Minal, and hi to everybody watching. Great to be here. I am Elizabeth Jones, Lizzie. I'm the Managing Director of WITH, one of the founding agencies of the WITH Global Alliance. We are a specialist B2B and tech marcoms agency. We're based in London and have a great deal of experience across corporate reputation and indeed crisis. So very excited to be here to chat about that.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Brittany Bevacqua. I'm the Managing Director at Gergory FCA. We are an integrated PR, marketing and communications firm based out of Ardmore, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly, with offices in New York City. And we are full-serve B2B technology, professional services, and financial services focused agency.
I'm Thibault. I'm the Managing Director of Cap&Cime PR based in Paris and representing France in the network. We do specialize quite a lot in tech, actually, both consumer tech and IT B2B, and defending actually the reputation of quite a lot of huge companies such as Intel or subsidiaries from Amazon. So let's say, needless to say, that we are facing some crisis comms issues or crisis at some point facing the data privacy topics. So I'm happy to be here and to share a part of my knowledge on that and how we can help legal specialists in the meantime.
Thank you so much, guys. That's wonderful to have you here. I think I'm going to start asking Elizabeth a specific question. In terms of PR and communication, how do you feel that we can make a difference because we are part of this entire ecosystem while dealing with data privacy and data protection challenges?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question and really timely, in fact, because I have just come back to London, returned back to London from the Privacy Rules AGM. And so was fortunate enough to be around the table with a lot of the members and indeed a lot of representatives from legal firms from around the world. And it is one of those areas where ultimately the collective group, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're an IT specialist, or whether you're a comms professional, our purpose, I guess, in these instances of data privacy and indeed data privacy crises is ultimately one of being risk managers. We're there to help these businesses put the best foot forward, to protect their reputation, to solve these problems, to fix the situation as quickly and as thoroughly as we possibly can, and then to help them move on in a ethical, in a safe, and in a legal way. And so the collaboration between communications and legal teams, I think, is really, really valuable. And one of the things that certainly came out of the AGM with privacy rules in the last few days is the appetite, that need for greater collaboration, and the benefit, I think, of seeing these issues, these crises from many different perspectives, and the benefits that can bring in helping to problem solve, as I said, and bring around that risk management.
Excellent. We were speaking earlier, Thibault, and I think it would be great if you can kind of highlight the perspective of how communication can support, customers looking for data privacy crisis.
Sure. Thank you for asking, Minal. From my standpoint, actually, this is all about not only crisis, because crisis is pretty everywhere in these days, but when talking about data privacy or data leaks issues, it comes to something even more crucial in terms of integration of all the skills around the company So that means obviously risk managers, and we are part of the risk management system or ecosystem, should I say. But obviously legal team, IT teams, and communication team in the meantime. Not speaking about the DPO, the famous DPO we have in Europe, thanks to the GDPR. But probably the bigger mistake would be to avoid or to pass on one big skill, which is communication. And we have several examples at the agencies where communication is involved very late in the process of managing the issue. And sometimes we are running out of time to properly manage the reputation side of things. And this is definitely, when you have handled the IT problem, this is the present task. But to preserve the future of the company, we need to reestablish a trust and confidence with all the publics around the company or the brands. And this is where we are as communicators.
If I could just jump in on that point, you know, Thibault mentioning about us being brought in a little too late in the day. That's something that we all kind of nodded quite enthusiastically to. So obviously something that we're all familiar with as comms professionals. At the AGM with Privacy Rules, we did this wonderful simulation where we were divided up into teams and given this hypothetical crises to manage. And I was only on one team, but the involvement of the communications was something that was brought in at very different moments from each of the teams involved. And indeed, not just the comms team. It was the thinking about, oh, do we need to bring in the insurance team, or do we need to bring in the IT professionals? How do we bring in, the internal comms side of things? And actually, at different points within the scenario, there were those light bulb moments where, oh, whoops, we probably should have brought these guys in, a little bit earlier. And I think it leads back to Thibault's point about being prepared, being involved from the get-go, and having that collaboration and that plan for the instance of a crisis.
I think it's definitely part of our job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I like to bring Brittany's perspective on this, because I think US is developed, and I think her experience and perspectives would be far more different from, I can surely say, from India.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Minal. I agree certainly with my counterparts on the panel today. I think too often we are brought in far too late to contain and accelerate the reassurance and recovery process, which is what everyone wants to get to when you're faced with a data privacy related incident or a data breach or other incidents like that. I think from the US, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the US has no single data privacy issue that is sweeping and covers all data types and all sectors of the population and all verticals. We have different regulations for healthcare. We have different regulations for what you can or cannot collect about children online under the age of 13, financial, data related data privacy issues. And it becomes very complex to understand. And as Thibault said, kind of no one group within an organization, whether it is the communications function or legal or tech or the executive leadership team, can adequately address, respond to, and then exit from a crisis incident on their own. So for me, when you ask the question, where can the communications partner be most effective? It really is in the readiness phase and helping companies to define who is on the crisis response team if something happens. Once you have that, what is the workflow for analyzing the different risks that the business can face in the relation or in the realm of data privacy? And then once you have that, what are the different scenarios that can play out? And what are the key messages or communications assets that you will eventually need to distribute or prepare as part of the response process? And not a lot of companies have this crisis communications plan in place. You would be really surprised. We work with brand new startups all the way through publicly traded companies. And, so I think some people are under the guise that more of the established Fortune 500 have solid plans in place. And we're finding more and more that that's just not the case, or if they do, they're outdated, incomplete, or in need of a major overhaul. So I think that readiness phase is so critical to being able to, accelerate your ability to address, resolve, and eventually recover from a data privacy related incident.
No, thank you so much. I think I can say for myself, after working for 2 decades in this industry, I still feel we are sort of, still educating the people the value of preparedness, and that's kind of brings into my next question, and I'll address it to Elizabeth, that both privacy rules and WJ have a similar intent of creating a ecosystem, at a global footprint. How do you feel that the local presence about these two, specialists can actually add value to a customer?
Yeah, it is so interesting. The legal teams and the comms teams can, on the face of things, feel absolutely worlds apart, right, in terms of our actual practices. But there are so many commonalities. And I think one of those that is most profound, particularly when you're working globally with a business that might have a footprint in many different territories, is understanding exactly how, in the issue of a crisis or a privacy incident, how best to go about managing that risk and managing that reputation. Thibault has talked to the GDPR regulatory environment. Brittany has talked to the fact that it's a bit of a minefield in the US because there's no consistency between, the different states and the different regulatory environments. And I imagine that is exactly the case, legally around the world. And so again, at the AGM, we had experts in GDPR sitting around the table who talked about the need for being able to pull on their colleagues, other members of the privacy rules group, to sound out what was going on in whether it was Singapore or over in Brazil, for instance. And that network of being able to share experience and learn from each other in terms of what is appropriate in different cultures and different territories is so similar to what we do on a comms level as well. We were talking before we came onto this webinar about how to say sorry or whether to say sorry in this instance of an issue or a crisis. And the approaches from very different angles dependent on your culture and where you came from. I was speaking to a member from the Privacy Rules Alliance from Japan who said it was unthinkable that a business wouldn't apologize in the instance of a breach or an incident. And then kind of looking at it from the other kind of side of the coin, actually, do we want to apologize? Does that make us culpable? Do we want to put that reputation on the line? And discussing, different ways of saying sorry without necessarily having to say those words. It's one of those cultural nuance pieces that is so fascinating, dependent on where you are in where you're operating.
I'll jump in too, because I'll add that with the clients that we work with, very few only operate in the United States. And why that is important is if we're representing a client that is based in the US, but has operations in France, in the UK, in India, the expansiveness of the potential fallout from a data privacy related incident now goes beyond our borders. And I need the reliance, and our clients need the reliance on not only legal representation in those local markets to understand the nuance and the requirements for disclosure or communicating with regulatory bodies when something happens. But as Lizzie said, on a communications level, there are differences in doing business and, what is appropriate, what is acceptable, and what is expected. And having the benefit of a network of partners that you can pull on and say, what do we do in this market? What's the recommendation is invaluable. And again, I go back to my earlier comment around how can we exit this incident with the least damage to reputation, with the reassurance that we've done something to correct the issue, and then move on to the recovery phase. And that really involves many, many different parties outside of your physical company's location.
No, I completely, agree. Of course, it's extremely different in, India at this point in time, because we're still defining our data privacy law. So I think we are at a different stage of, evolution. Thibault, do you feel that it's any different, or it's pretty similar in terms of your thought process of how local presence can coexist between legal and comms?
I'm gonna introduce you directly to an example, and making the value and showing the value of all the two functions working together. But the major part of big US lawyer companies and law company in Paris are currently hiring communicators as a team member. It can be an agency, but very often they are literally raising their own agency in-house, because they are conscious about the potential and the value that communication adds to the legal practice. Whatever it comes to M&A, where there is also a big part of comms, but also to data privacy issue, and this is our topic today. And so that's part of the major trend, and I think that the bigger have already understand that. The second one is that we are very complementary in terms of skills, and our practices are quite similar in terms of we are doing advice and counsel, and this is what we sell in the end, and we are addressing exactly the same issue when talking about data privacy. This is all about managing the risk and mitigating the risk. You are mitigating the risk from a legal standpoint. We are mitigating the risk from a reputational standpoint. And this is where our interest should be completely common.
Excellent. I'll kind of dive into the last question of the, the webinar. At this point in time, there companies are still kind of not aware, as correctly Brittany highlighted, in terms of the preparedness and the value of how to do it. So from your perspective, can you give an insight in terms of what are the top 2 things people should kind of invest into at this stage of understanding of the legal as well as the comm collaboration? So Lizzie, why don't you head start?
In terms of top 2, there's a shopping list of many things that a business can do. And I think it goes to the point that Brittany was making about preparedness. A business can invest in crisis and issues long before anything ever happens, and indeed, hopefully may not ever happen. But it's the security and safety of kind of having that. So I think, the point about having a playbook, something as simple as that, identifying who those key players from within your organization are going to be, and briefing them on a process. Like having something as fundamental as that in place is so valuable. So I think that would probably be the most important part, particularly when focusing on crisis. But I think the other element, which kind of lifts our head out of that moment when everything is going wrong and it feels like it's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, to think about what businesses can do that lay the foundations for their reputation irrespective of the moment of crisis. If you are seen to be a good operator, a fair player, a business that is ethical and is one that treats its staff and employees well, all of those pieces that go to building your reputation outside of any issue, the way that you can then use that and leverage that in a moment of crisis, in a moment where something isn't going as planned, will set you in such good stead. And then, the opportunity for building off the back of a crisis, if you have that legacy, if you have that foundational work in place, it can be completely game changing as to how quickly and how well you recover from a moment of crisis. So those 2 would be my kind of recommendations.
Well said. Brittany, would you want to kind of share?
Yeah, sure. And Lizzie, I totally agree with everything you've said. I think the other big thing that companies need to consider, and it's true with working with communications agencies like all of ours on the line, but in legal firms as well, and as well as the technology folks, there is more than one audience almost always in every single crisis that happens. And certainly those impacted are typically the direct audience, but there is a subset of other audiences that also need to be communicated with in different ways. You need to think about your employee communications. So if employee data may or may not have been impacted, let's say in a data breach, that is a much different message than perhaps some, if customer data was impacted. The regulators, there are very strict guidelines when a data privacy related issue happens. When you are filling out these disclosure forms and submitting them to attorney generals, that need to be mapped out and submitted as part of the claims that are made. Investors, if you're a startup, what are you going to say to your investors? So I think in the preparedness realm, it's also very important for companies to lean on their legal comms and technology partners and say, okay, what is the scope and scale of our target audiences? And have we adequately thought about how we are going to communicate with these individual groups? What are the differences in things that we need to convey to them? And what are the different channels that we might actually need to send these communications out to? So that's an add that I'll make to the wonderful question.
Excellent. Why don't we end with Thibault?
Thank you, Minal. My point would be, I can just add on all the smart things Elizabeth and Brittany have just said. But my point would be to test the process and to crash test the process, should I say. Once you get the playbook, you get the scenarios, the strategy, the crisis cell to be involved in case of emergency and so on. You need to crash test that. And this is something we do on a regular basis, and this is more and more often. We crash test the strategy and the planning, just highlighting one case. If that would pop up tomorrow, what would happen? And then we involve, like a real exercise, we involve all the teams who should be involved in case of emergency around the table, and we are rolling up the scenario with fake journalist calls, with fake tweets of clients or customer who are nervous about their data in the nature and so on, just to see where there is gray areas where the process should be improved or the strategy could be changed at some point. That would be my piece of advice on this one.
Excellent. Thank you so much, guys, for actually sharing such valuable insights. It's very rare that, we talk about legal and comms in the same platform. And I'm so happy that we have, and at least we've kickstarted as entities to speak and voice the importance of it. As I hear from each one of you, I think there's one insight I would give most companies is that we have to think not reactively, but predictively. And I think if we start preparing ourselves, it's going to be do not really create a problem which is of that level of impact. And I think I'm very happy to have you guys here. And thank you so much with Global Alliance and Privacy Rules for having us here.